This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the third week of October 2013. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio, and today on the MMA Beat, we have an all SB Nation edition of the show. We've got Luke Thomas of SiriusXM Fight Club and, of course, MMAfighting.com. We've got over there Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com and the noob, Michael Stetz of MMAmania.com and Darsai Radio, right?
That's right.
Anything else?
I am the ensign of the Star Trek voyage this afternoon.
Very nice. I have no idea what you just said, but I'll take your word for it. Guys, we got a lot to get to. Last week we were off. It was UFC 166. And there's a lot to talk about regarding UFC 166, but we're not going to start there. We're going to start with TUF Brazil. On Monday, Dana White told Chael Sonnen that he is going to be coaching on TUF Brazil opposite Wanderlei Silva. There's a lot to really sink your teeth in here. But first things first, do you like this idea? Do you like the idea of having Chael and Wanderlei as coaches on an international edition of TUF?
Well, I have to say, before the show, I heard some of the panel discussion about it, and I was very surprised to hear some negative reaction towards it. I think it's
spoiler alert.
I think it's pretty great. Well, I mean, I'll just speak for yourself, but I just mean I thought I was going to come in here and everyone was going to high five each other over this, and that turns out not to be the case. Understand the context in which we're operating here. So the TUF Brazil one, or whatever it is, debuts on Globo and pulls in 12 million viewers. I could be wrong about these numbers. If anyone has better numbers, I'm happy to get them. But my understanding was the second season, the ratings plummeted down to about 1 million an episode for a very, very widely distributed channel. I mean, the channel has no equivalent in the United States or North American market. They had to do something. You know, in fact, don't you guys remember the reports coming out that Globo was going to drop it? UFC had to formally respond to this, saying no, these reports are not true. They had to shake it up. I can scarcely think of a better way to shake up that show, to get people to ask questions like, gee, how is that going to work? Is Sonnen going to coach Brazilian fighters? How are they going to respond? Is there going to be a mass boycott? How is he going to make it through the night? These are all questions that are going to make you want to watch the show. I understand there's some concerns logistically. How is it going to air here? Okay, fine. But to save that show, or at least, I don't know, saving is a strong word, reinvigorate that show to make it really pop for a third season, that is an excellent decision.
Michael, he kind of brings up the TV situation here in the U.S. That's a big deal, right? If this doesn't air in the U.S., isn't it all for naught? I mean, what's the point of having this? I know Brazil's a big market, but at the end of the day, U.S. is your market, right?
Yeah, if you're going to have Chael Sonnen, how do you not have him on TV here? Whether it's FS2, then there's a question if it's going to run against TUF 19. Are they going to run simultaneously? There's talk of USA versus Brazil. That would be intriguing. But if you have USA personalities, I think they would do well to have them on the U.S. market. I know the focus was Brazil for the first 2 seasons. Now they're trickling in Chael. I mean, he's hated there, so obviously they'll watch because they hate him down there. But my question is, I'm sure it'll do good in Brazil. Are there going to be U.S. athletes, and what platform is it going to be here in the U.S.? Is it going to be on FS2, or is it just going to be online?
And Chuck wants to have, correct me if I'm wrong here, you want Chael to coach the Brazilians and Wanderlei to coach the Americans, right? That's what you said.
Just to mix things up.
Yeah.
I was thinking outside the box on that. I mean, like we're saying, as soon as more details come available, maybe it makes more sense.
And look, we're talking about TUF Brazil, so that in itself is...
I haven't watched the first 2 TUF Brazils. I don't know if you guys have. I haven't talked to a lot of people who have.
They're dreadful.
Yeah, and it's like, in some ways, if you are trying to reinvigorate or maybe just kickstart it, in general, this might be the way to do it, especially up here. A lot of the Brazilian fighters that come off that show, people don't know about them. People haven't paid close enough attention. I feel like this could be a possibility of you. If you talk to any fighter out there, they'll talk about all the unplumbed. There's so much depth of fighter out there. There's so many good fighters that are undiscovered. Well, that should be a platform. I feel like this might attract a little more attention having a guy like Chael Sonnen down there for North Americans at least, since this is a North American promotion, for us to familiarize ourselves with them as well.
So the thing is, for me though, like, I'm not in Brazil, so if any Brazilian journalist wants to challenge me and tell me I'm wrong, it's your country. You know more about it than I do. But I think I'm getting the vibe that while Brazil is hot and Brazil is awesome and where Brazil will be, a big market, if not the biggest market in 20 years, who knows? You can't phone it in anymore there. You can't just have we're gonna throw up a tent, we're gonna put UFC on it, and it will rain cheers upon us. There was a case there where early on you could just do almost whatever. You kind of have to work at it a little bit now. They're getting used to a high standard of quality there. And if Brazilians love anything, it's not just a chance to see themselves on a grander stage, it's the chance to see themselves on a grander stage killing people not from Brazil, which Chael Sonnen, at least in theory, provides an opportunity for.
Michael, you mentioned TUF 19, and right now, the details are a little murky. We don't know exactly when we're going to start taping TUF Brazil, when we're going to air it, all that stuff. But it might be at around the same time as TUF 19, and that's the big North American show. That's BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar. Receives a lot of buzz up until this point. They're actually taping it right now. Is that a little too much TUF? If it does happen at around the same time, even right after it, can't one hurt the other?
Yeah, I mean, not to sound cheesy, but it is tough. I mean, you're gonna
Oh my God.
I went there. You're gonna DVR one of them, watch the other one, get backed up, follow the different storylines. It's a lot, and I think when you don't cater or like get into a character on the show or a person on the show, it's tough to keep watching those full episodes. What are you going to do? Fast forward and just watch the fight so you know who went to the next round? It's tough for a lot of people. I mean, we have to do it. It's our jobs. But to get the fans involved for two shows running at the same time, I think one of them is gonna falter, and it's probably going to be the Brazil one because everyone will be eyes on BJ
Really?
Penn.
I was just going to ask you which interests you more, BJ, Frankie, Chael, Van. If you had to watch this one, which are you watching?
Well, I think I want to see the BJ Penn Frankie fight more. Even though
You want to see that fight a third time more than Wanderlei and Chael?
Yeah, I mean, even though I think we both, I know the outcome, at least in my eyes, it's going to be Frankie winning and Chael winning, but I'd much rather watch the storyline for there. To me, it's too easy. Chael's just going to rip Wanderlei apart every chance he gets to be witty. There's not much of a battle there. At least with Frankie and BJ, maybe some type of new storyline will come out of it.
If these things do air concurrently, like we're kind of sort of talking about, if they cross over, the smartest thing the UFC could do is make a field of 64 bracket. Make sure that the weight classes all jibe, and then have them go down, and then you have the season
Like a real
winners
World
against
Cup.
them. Yep, exactly.
Here's something that people haven't brought up, or maybe some have.
By the way, can I just cast a vote?
Sure.
I would definitely watch the Chael Wanderlei over.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to see them hitting each other with shovels in someone's backyard or an expo. But on that show, I would watch that over Frankie and.
And you know why? Because you love that video.
I do love that video
Yeah.
secretly. No, I hate that video.
Deep down at work.
The Mr. Olympia you're talking about?
Yeah. He's not a fan. Okay, so here's what's interesting about this. When you watch the whole thing play out with Dana on Fox Sports Live with Chael Sonnen, you could tell he's going through a bit of an internal struggle. He doesn't really want to say this right now, but he wants to drop some news. Chael kind of got it out of him. And he says, I was going to announce this in late November, and you kind of think about it, Chael's fighting late-ish November. He was probably going to announce it after UFC 167, which makes sense on paper. Chael's fighting Rashad first. Does this hurt the Rashad fight? Does this make the Rashad fight at least feel less special because we know what Chael is doing next, and that in some ways is a bigger fight than the Rashad fight?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, do we really? Let me ask you deeply. Do you really care about that Rashad fight?
From a
fan's
hype
perspective, do you as a
matchup, I like it. I want to see who wins. I think it's a lot more of a difficult fight to predict than Wanderlei and Chael.
I think it's an important fight to put on
From
a
a
card.
hype standpoint, there's nothing there.
Right. I think it's an important fight to put on the card. I think it's a good fight to have to see where Rashad's at. There's real value to it, but as a promotional vehicle, it's DOA. And that's not the worst thing you can have. I kind of thought like the Brian Stann Chael Sonnen fight was real similar. Like the two basically refused to ever have any kind of friction, and it worked out because there was still some of that friction that Chael Sonnen was surfing off of related to Anderson Silva, so it didn't really matter. I kind of feel like this is a really similar situation, not quite to the same degree. Obviously, Anderson Silva was, still champion at that time, and they had their history. But for me, it's basically analogous to that. I think Rashad's a tougher opponent than Brian Stann, arguably anyway. But I think if Chael wins, no one will care. And he'll use that platform on that 20th anniversary show to make the Wanderlei fight even bigger.
But if Chael loses, does it make you care less about
I don't know if it matters, honestly.
It doesn't.
Ultimately, if that's what's looming in the backdrop is if he's going to fight Wanderlei Silva, I don't know if it really hurts him if he loses. I mean, ultimately, it's always better to go in with a head of momentum in a situation like that. But that's one of the beauties of it, is that people want to see that fight. And you're right about the Brian Stann thing. This has occurred to me as well. This particular Rashad Evans fight against Chael Sonnen, it just doesn't resonate that much, even though it is a good stylistic matchup and it's a very dangerous fight. I mean, obviously Rashad Evans could win this fight. It doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to see that happening. But for whatever reason, we have Chael Sonnen now categorized into fights that we want to see him win, again, rather than fights that are just competitive or something like that. It's like we've put him on a different level of what we want to see in Chael Sonnen. So obviously the Wanderlei Silva fight, that's what makes that a little bit more fun, is that, all of a sudden we finally get to see this thing where this bad blood has been brewing. And there's a lot of other guys over time, that would have that sort of same effect, I think, with Chael Sonnen. So I don't really think it takes away, in a long story short, I don't think it takes away from UFC 167 just because it's a unique case of Chael Sonnen.
Before we get to UFC 166, as we have to move on, can we just say that the evolution of Chael Sonnen, I feel like I bring this up all the time, is just really one of the most fascinating stories in the history of our sport. I mean, just a couple of years ago, he's fighting UFC 104 on the non-Spike TV portion of the card against Yushin Okami. No one cares about this guy. This year alone, he's on The Ultimate Fighter. He's launching Fox Sports 1. He's all over Fox. They bring him in to fight on TUF Brazil. They bring him for the 20th anniversary show. He really is the UFC's go-to guy. He's the face of the UFC in many ways.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And I struggle to think of like something in another sport, even a combat sport, where someone produced that kind of turnaround. I am grasping, and I don't really think there's a clean comparison you can make. Chael Sonnen, just to wrap a bow on this, but Chael Sonnen is just ultimate proof that, as much as, and I'm one of these purists too who cry about what matters is your octagon results, and I'm sympathetic to that argument. I really am. He is living proof, man. If you can buoy your performance in the octagon with all these other extra octagon opportunities, you can't say it doesn't matter what happens in there, but you can just do wonders. You are many. You contain multitudes. There are many opportunities to have a career in fighting that involve fighting and also involve many other things.
He had such a quiet approach too. Like you're mentioning, Okami, Marquardt, those types of fights. When we were just talking about, when he sort of respects the opponent and all that, they kind of were pretty silent fights. But before he came out, it was the Anderson Silva moments, really, and his audacity in those moments. Nobody had really talked to Anderson Silva in those ways. Nobody had ever disrespected Anderson Silva in those ways, and he went on a tirade that just kept going on. And it was almost like you're watching sort of something transcendent happening, and you weren't able to. And to this day, I don't think people really know how to take Chael Sonnen. There's so many different sides to what he does. He makes people uncomfortable in general because you don't know who you're talking to, which version you're going to get.
Yeah, I remember at UFC 109 going into that Marquardt fight when he was talking all the smack in the world about Anderson Silva, and I was thinking to myself, God, this is so great, but he's not going to beat me.
And he was like a 3-1 or 4-1 underdog.
Yeah, he's not going to win, and then he wins, and we see what happens. Okay,
Can I just add that with Rashad, I mean, it's a full plea for Sonnen leading up to that fight. Talk about a guy that's flying under the radar. I mean, what have you heard from Rashad other than seeing him in Tyrone Spong's corner in glory? You've heard nothing. Now he gets to continue to focus. Chael's going to have that, plus he's going to get badgered with all these Wanderlei Silva questions leading up to that fight. So it's only to Rashad's benefit.
Very good point. Guys, we've had 6 days to digest UFC 166. On Saturday night, Dana White called it the best night in UFC history. Joe Rogan called the Gilbert Melendez-Diego Sanchez fight the best fight in UFC history. And now that we've had a few days to actually take this all in, was it the best night? Was that the best fight?
Certainly not the best fight. I think that's just...
Even Gilbert doesn't think it was the best fight.
Of course, because it's not. I mean, Joe Rogan is a, he just sort of showered in his own passion, which,
God bless him.
Who hasn't done that from time to time? It's all right. Not the best fight ever, but certainly, if that's not the best event, man, it's on the short list. Historically speaking, I always look to Pride Body Blow, which was the first Fedor Nogueira fight. It was Kevin Randleman versus Rampage Jackson and a host of other really, really interesting fights. And that was good for its era, but you look at a fight like an event like 166, I mean, top to bottom, not just that they were entertaining, but that each portion of the card, from the Facebook to the Fox Sports to the it was irrelevant for that section. Kyoji Horiguchi, the top prospect out of Japan, irrespective of weight class, fighting on the Facebook card. Then you had the Adlan Amagov fight moving along, and then you had Dodson sort of reasserting himself. And it was a night where guys that were coming off of losses all got wins again, like Dodson and many, many others. The heavyweight title was up for grabs. It was the crowning of the coronation of the undisputed reality of Cain Velasquez as arguably the best fighter on earth. I mean that, true. You can make that claim. If that's not the best, I'm willing to entertain an argument that something else could be it. I thought the main event, the only thing for me was like the main event was great, but not sort of like epically historical in that way. But short of that, that is about as good as it gets.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Luke. It's top to bottom. You had 4 finishes on the Facebook prelims. I think there was 8 total, 7 knockouts, 1 Darce choke finish. Excitement, finishes, battles. I mean, yeah, you could say the prelims on TV. A couple decisions. A lot of people weren't into the KJ Noon-Soteropoulos fight, but you had Jessica Ai asserting herself in the women's division with a controversial decision, but it was a good battle between her and Kaufman, who's been around as one of the top in women's bantamweight for a long time now. So you got to see those two go at it. I also agree with Luke, like, the main event was a little one-sided to be great, but you sprinkle in that battle between Sanchez and Melendez, and then you have Dotson 125 knockout. I think it had everything. It's definitely, it's hard to say, is it the best ever? But it's definitely one of the best cards ever. And as like you said with the Melendez-Sanchez, one of the better fights. I don't think greatest all time. I think Rogan and Goldberg get a little carried away in the moment because we've heard them say greatest fight all time. I mean, how many times?
It's hard.
He had to preface it. This is my new favorite fight of all time.
It's hard to call that one the best fight of all time. I mean, because we have seen so many fights similar to that where guys just basically stand in front of each other. And there's this element of like human preservation that you always, fighters have it as well, obviously. You want to preserve yourself. It's weird when you see that barrier come down and guys just stand toe to toe like that. And I think that's always an interesting transaction when that happens, especially for a guy like Melendez with so much hanging in the balance of what happens, if he loses a fight where he got into a gunfight like that and plays roulette with Diego Sanchez, which is what Diego Sanchez loves to do, and everybody knows that. But when you watch it, we just did watch Jones and Gustafsson a couple weeks prior to that, and to me, that's still a better fight because it had so many different elements to it. There was a definitive turning point in that fight. In the 4th round with the elbow, he was going to lose that fight if he doesn't land that. I mean, that's a huge change of events just in a single fight. To me, those types of there's fights like that just have more at stake and they have more more hinging on every move that still kind of ring true for me as a big time fight. But as far as a fight card, in my mind, I tried to really think about that. I was like, is this it there? And I could not think of one that was better from top to bottom.
The last time you said it was UFC 116, and I think that main event was a lot better.
Infinitely better.
Yeah, Brock Lesnar coming back against Carwin. But if you look top to bottom, 166 was better than 116.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, but that main event, man.
The main event was
it's insane. I mean, I remember being short of breath when Lesnar was walking into the cage.
Lieben submitting Akiyama, which now it doesn't sound like anything spectacular, but back then was a big deal.
Yeah. The thing is about the why I agree with Chuck here is that one advantage I think boxing has over MMA is that when you get an incredible 12-round battle in boxing, there's a plot. There's a narrative, and the narrative swings in real time, and you're absorbing they're telling you a story. You can't. It's not true that you can't get that in MMA with a 3-round fight, but it's much easier to get that with a 25-minute battle, particularly one between the best light heavyweight and the second best, basically, on earth. That to me, there was as you mentioned. I mean, Dude Jones was losing that fight before that elbow in that 4th round, and so to me, when you have elite level skill and they're still killing each other and there's narrative, I don't know how you can top that. But certainly 166, those guys outdid themselves.
Did I hear correctly? Is Cain your pound for pound king?
I don't know, but I think you can make it. If I saw it, I wouldn't.
He doesn't get any credit.
The thing is, he doesn't listen. The division he's in is so weak. He's fought Bigfoot twice and all that. Okay, so I can see from a meritorious standpoint. But it's one of these questions like. The UFC is just a talking point. Remember when Carwin fought Lesnar? They were like, "Who's the baddest man on the planet?" You must have heard "baddest man on the planet" 50,000 times. But in this case, like Cain Velasquez, I'm pretty sure he is the baddest man on the planet. He would beat the brakes off of anybody in the UFC. Well, there is Wes Sims in that triangle, but sort of that triangle of death from Wes Sims. Cain Velasquez is a special athlete.
What do you think of Cormier's decision to go down to 205? Is this the right move for him? And if so, what do you do with him right off the bat? He says he wants to fight Gustafsson, but not in Europe. There aren't a lot of options for him right now at 205. I think
he's brilliant because if he doesn't start throwing John Jones' name out there, this becomes a huge controversy why he wouldn't fight Cain Velasquez. Nobody's given him a bunch of grief about not fighting Cain Velasquez, even though he is now, if he's not the number 2, he's right there with Junior Sanchez. The only other guy really who has that intrigue. So it's really strange that he was able to sort of start talking about Jones, start talking about that way out in advance, telegraph his move so that he avoided all of that sort of controversy, which is brilliant. Even Dana White doesn't seem to mind, you know, like, oh, well, that's what he wants to do. But as far as going down to 205, it is very intriguing. I mean, he has sort of slowly been able to do this, and I feel like he does present challenges just about anybody you put him in there against. He just happens to be going down at a time, though, when John Jones's plate is pretty full. He's got Glover Teixeira, and he's got Alexander Gustafsson sort of waiting in the wings. So it comes down to who would you put him up against in that division. And people are talking about Phil Davis, maybe Rashad Evans, if he's able to win his next fight or something like that. But in my mind, I think he should fight Dan Henderson. If Dan Henderson is able to beat Vitor Belfort, I would love to see that fight. That would be such a Dan Henderson's had a lot of experience fighting bigger guys, heavyweight, and et cetera. I just think that would make it for a really good matchup.
What do you do with him?
DC. I mean, to me, like right now, the D's starting to stand for diva. Here's a guy that's the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix. He comes in, right, and I want to fight Jones after I fight Frank Mir. Well, you had a lackluster Boerfest against Frank Mir. Then you went out and did what you were supposed to do and beat Roy Nelson. Now you're going to drop down. You already called out Jones the first time, right? Now, all right, I don't want to fight Jones. I want to fight Gustafsson. I don't want to fight Phil Davis. I'm not going to fight Cain. I won't fight Gustafsson in Sweden. I mean, what's next? A tour rider? Does he want a bowl of green M&Ms in the back room for the next UFC? I mean, he keeps asking. Like, sit by the phone, and Joe Silva will give you a 205er, and then go fight him and prove your worth in the 205 division.
Wow, Michael Staggs.
I'm not that harsh about it. I mean, fighters, listen, I think there is some proving to do at 205. Everyone's like, how's he going to do against Gustafsson? I don't really know. I don't know how.
Will he make the weight?
I think he'll make the weight. I think he'll be fine with the weight. That's honestly the last of my concerns. What concerns me is that he's going to be 35 in 2014. Speed is going to be an issue. That's one thing Cormier told me personally. He liked fighting at heavyweight because the guys were slow. They're not going to be as slow at light heavyweight. How much slower or how much faster? I don't know. We'll see. So the question is, I don't really know how he's going to look. I have reason to believe he'll be competitive at a minimum, but how competitive? I don't know. So I agree with Michael in the sense that you got to get out there, you got to fight somebody, and there's a couple of options out there. But I am not opposed to fighters at least trying to define their own reality, even with unrealistic demands. If that's your initial, like when you get a new job, you go in there asking for things you're not going to get because they're going to wind you down a little bit to something a little more manageable. I'm okay with that.
And to be clear, his coach Javier Mendez told us on the MMA Hour that Cormier wouldn't want to fight Phil Davis, but I asked Cormier about this, and he said he would fight Phil Davis.
Ooh.
So
that's a great fight.
That's an excellent fight.
That is an interesting fight.
And he did look a lot quicker at his weight. I'm throwing those switch kicks, double kick combinations. So he looked like he can be a force at 205. I have nothing against his credibility as far as a fighter. I just think that with the demands and stuff,
I don't see any way that they put Cormier against Gustafsson. Not right away.
No way.
No.
You're compromising too much there. Too many potential
You're killing
matchups.
two birds with one stone. Yeah. Also, Dana White keeps saying, "Oh yeah, Jones is going to fight Gustafsson next." I feel like he's forgetting that Jones is going to have to fight Glover, and Gustafsson has another fight. I mean, do they know something that we don't know?
There's also Musasi out there. Cormier versus Musasi.
He's going down to 185.
Oh,
they won nothing. Yeah, they won nothing, hoping for a February return. Okay, let's put 166 to bed. Let's look ahead to this weekend. One of those rare weekends where we have a UFC event, a Bellator event, and World Series of Fighting.
Lucky us.
How about that? Friday is Bellator, and then we've got Saturday a double header of sorts. UFC in the afternoon in England, and then World Series of Fighting in Florida. Of all the fights happening this weekend, which is the best? Which interests you the most?
Well, can we say that all three cards are
really just
incredibly nubs, lackluster beyond compare?
None of them interest you.
There are good fights on all the cards.
How about this? First, since you brought it up, rank them for me.
Oh, UFC card would have to be first. I think that main event is definitely the best main event of the weekend. Okay. I don't think there's any getting around that. Second, I'd go Bellator. Third, I'd go World Series of World Series of Fighting. I'm sorry.
Really?
No, I'm teasing.
No. World Series is less interesting than that Bellator card?
To me, the fight that I care most about in the World Series of Fighting is Justin Gaethje and Dan Lazon. Gaethje's a little bit of a wild guy, and I'm going to see if he can rein it in because I really believe in him. Miguel Torres is coming back. That's interesting.
Marlon Moraes.
I like him, but I think he's I don't think it's a very competitive fight for him.
Yeah.
You know, all respect to Carson Beebe, right?
Yeah.
So, but that being said, the fight that interests me the most, obviously, is going to be the main event for UFC. But that's sort of like an easy thing.
Yeah.
The sleeper fight, if that's what you're asking about, for me is Will Brooks Saad Awad on the Bellator card, because Will Brooks was the super hot prospect and was looking great in Bellator, and he's got everything you would want out of a guy you want to hype. And then he goes and gets his doors blown off out of nowhere by Saad Awad in the last season's tournament. They both won their quarterfinal bout. They're going to meet again. And honestly, Brooks should win that. I don't know that he will. Saad Awad might be your most underrated guy in Bellator. Now, what does that mean? I don't know exactly. I don't know how far you want to put that. But to me, this is sort of do or die for Will Brooks. You can't lose to the same guy twice and still be a hot prospect. You either move along or you don't. He looked okay in the quarterfinals, but that is the one where I'm like, it's do or die for him.
How about you?
Yeah, and echo your sentiments on do or die. The most important fight, unequivocally to me this weekend, is John Fitch. Do or die situation. I think if he loses to Marcelo Faia, it's over. It's probably the most important fight of his life. After getting steamrolled by Berkman, I think a lot of eyes will be switching over to see what Fitch does against Alfaya.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's obviously the UFC main event has some intrigue, obviously with Machida kind of fighting the new weight and everything. But I still like the Ross Pearson fight with Melvin Guillard. I just think that both those guys are very obliging of each other's styles, and therefore it's going to be one of those types of fights.
I don't think it's going to last very long, though.
Probably not, but I mean, in terms of if you like knockouts, I like knockouts.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm really excited to see Ali Quinta back. I thought he looked great in his return in August. And then I think John Lineker, if he makes weight, could be next for a title shot. Or how about John Lineker versus John Dotson, if he makes weight?
Fun.
Because I think he probably would have gotten a title shot after his last win, but he missed weight, and the UFC just doesn't trust to put him in there. They don't trust him. But him versus Dotson could be one of the best flyweight fights of all time. For two of the hardest hitting guys, right? I mean, that's a great fight.
Two guys who can push each other away, but the problem is Dotson's a really good wrestler. If he can thump, that's true, but he can also wrestle. I would definitely heavily favor Dotson in that matchup. Because I'm Debbie Downer and I'm going to spoil all your dreams, Oriel.
So are you guys down on the weekend as Luke is?
No, I mean, I think when you have a lot to choose from, you have a lot to choose from. I mean, to me, that fight night, it's kind of a dud. I was more excited about Bisping Munoz than I am Machida. I don't see any way, shape, or form how Munoz beats Machida. I just don't see it. Whereas Bisping and Munoz, I favored Bisping in that one, but that to me was more interesting. And then you have RFA Friday night too, which is a little interesting. You have Mike Rhodes. And that's become the unofficial, AAA feeder league for the UFC. They're fighting with the Octagon now. So there's some interesting fights there. So I think a full weekend, but not just all different, Bellator, everything. I think it could be fun. You don't have to necessarily focus on one thing. Set your DVR accordingly, bounce around. There could be worse things than a full plate,
true. That's true.
Glass half full.
I know, but I'm at the point now, man, where I watch so many fights. It's going to be like Clockwork Orange, where you're going to get the toothpicks to hold my eyelids open because they're just bleeding into each other.
I'm not even going to ask you about the UFC's 2014 schedule that was announced.
I almost jumped off of a bridge.
37 or 35, something like that.
Yeah, 35, at least for now. Okay, I want to ask you guys about a fighter who competed a couple of weeks ago, who Dana White on Saturday night called the new Conor McGregor. That is Holly Holm, and she's in a very interesting spot right now because she is steamrolling through all her opponents. She has 2 more fights left on her legacy contract, and it seems like every time she fights, at least our little bubble, our community gets really excited and everyone's talking about it afterwards. No real opponents out there at 135, especially since a lot of them are tied up either on The Ultimate Fighter or Invicta. Who's she fighting in legacy? Do you bring her in? Or do you continue this slow build of her just beating up cans, and then when you bring her in, you do a big thing with her? Well,
the thing is you need to bring her in, but here is the major problem. Outside of Jan Finney, and even that fight was basically contested on the feet, no one has put her to work on the ground. And this isn't the men's 135 division where you can go to some regional fight or a regional scene, and you may get a guy who can't really fight, but at least he was a high school or even a Division I wrestler, and he can put your guy through the paces. she can't even really get that. Everyone's high on her, and obviously we put her GIFs or GIFs, whatever you pronounce it.
I believe it's GIF.
I think it's GIF actually.
Actually, you're probably right.
I think it's GIF.
Yeah.
I know. I always say GIF, but here's the point. Whatever it is, the reality is people love it because she can crack, man. She can totally crack, and I give her credit. But it's like in everything else in MMA, until you've actually opened up all the doors to see how everything looks on the other side, you don't really know. There's reason to believe, obviously, with the boxing and kickboxing background, her skill set's going to be pretty lopsided. So I think it'd be interesting to sign her, but she hasn't, and I mean this plainly, like she still has a lot to prove.
She's not UFC ready?
The problem is, can she get UFC ready outside of the UFC? And I don't know the answer to that. In the men's division, yes. In her division, I don't know.
She can't fight with the Jermaine Darondamis of the world or the Alexandra Albus, who some people think.
Well, that's what's it. Maybe
if
you sign her and bring her to the UFC, maybe you give her matchups that are not, you're not giving her these marquee
Desi treatment.
Yeah, you give her the matchups. I mean,
he fights other strikers, and it's awesome.
She can't take forever with her. I mean, she's 32 or 33 years old at this point. I mean, at some point you got to say, well, it's time to throw you in the fire, and she's got a name, and the division could definitely use that. Another person coming up the rungs there. So I think her next move should definitely be with the UFC.
There's something to be said though for the kind of slow build on the regional scene, and then when she comes in, she's a really big star. Which do you prefer? Get her in right away and build her up in the UFC or outside of the UFC?
Well, I think it's a unique situation because you're talking about a world champion boxer who's got 38 boxing fights under her belt. While it's not mixed martial arts, she's had plenty of competition throughout her career. So it's not like you're really just throwing her to the fire. You know what I mean? Like, yes, as far as MMA, but she's had a lot of competition. Maybe you could go Invicta and UFC have a good relationship. Maybe give her a couple fights in Invicta, see how she does there against some tougher competition. Certainly tougher than Legacy or the prelim can she's beaten up when she was in Bellator. Maybe give her a couple fights in Invicta, see how she does there, and then have her come over to the UFC. But I wouldn't have an issue if they brought her right over to the UFC because let's face it, it's pretty thin over there for the women's division. So adding another girl that could make it interesting. I wouldn't have a problem with that either.
She comes from the boxing world, and they are treating her like a boxer as far as her build. I spoke to Mike Winklejohn on Saturday. I saw him at the fights, and he was like, look, she makes more money outside of the UFC right now. Why am I going to put her in the UFC? She's like, his pet project. I mean, he has been grooming her since I think she was like 16 years old. So he is in no rush right now.
She's good, but like, what happens if Liz Carmouche double legs her?
Right.
It's a wrap. It's a wrap. And so the reality is, if you can match her up against the Darondamis and maybe even Kedzie, although I think they're trying to get a little bit of Jackson. So I was saying, in theory, with Kedzie, right, somebody who's willing to just duke it out with you, I can see that being really awesome. And at the right price, if you can sign at the right price, hey, that's great. But I just worry about hardcore fans being like, oh my God, is this the one to beat Ronda Rousey? No.
Let's end on this fun topic. On Thursday in Houston during the pre-fight scrum, Dana White told the story about trying to sign Fedor. He tells us this story every few months, but every time it's very interesting. It's so secretive.
It takes on new chapters.
Yes, exactly. And him
he
wanting.
Smiles telling that story too.
Yeah.
He giggles.
He said there's a lot more to be said, but he's waiting for the day to say it. He really wanted to put together the Brock Lesnar-Fedor fight, and it got me thinking about the best fights that never happened in MMA history. I mean, the history is a short one, and we're a relatively young sport, but there are a few out there. In your opinion, what's the best fight that never happened?
Well, there's low-hanging fruit there on one that I'm not going to pick because I know these, or actually two low-hanging fruit.
We're the ones who go for the low-hanging.
Yeah, I'm going to give them to these two. But I'm going to pick one that was sort of on my mind, and I know everyone's going to say, oh, I don't care about that one, but for the history of the sport, every era has a fight that didn't get made. And I'm not saying this would be the best one, so I'm not really answering your question in the best way. But the one that I think never got made that I thought would be kind of cool, there's two permutations of it. Hickson versus Sakuraba or Hickson versus Frank Shamrock. Neither of those really got made. And to me, that is I want to say it's a gaping hole in the history of MMA, but it's one where
Hickson Sakuraba would have been a big deal.
That would have been huge. Because look at the guys he fought. Hoyler, way undersized. Henzo, I love Henzo, but he's not the technician that Hickson is. And then High-End, which is not on the same level as the other guys. So it just wasn't. And then Hoyce was, not even close to Hickson's level as an athlete or a technician. So that, to me, I mean, what they could have done in Japan at that time when the Kakutogi boom was huge, could have been epic. We didn't get it, but that to me was, dang, we should have had that one,
Your pick.
Prime Frank Shamrock against prime Chuck Liddell. I think that would have been an amazing fight. Obviously, didn't happen. Frank left, but I think that one, or even you could put Couture against Shamrock at 205. Obviously, I think those two would have been pretty great to see.
Now, is that more of a fantasy matchup? Do you think that their careers really crisscross? You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess Frank Shamrock at that point, I guess when Chuck was doing his thing, Frank was kind of out there, Elite XC, and kind of a little bit. Yeah, it was a kind of Elite XC, although Chuck was knocked out, like a year or so later. But I never really felt like that was a fight that needed to happen.
You mean like there was like people had discussed it?
Yeah.
And it just didn't happen. Yeah.
It felt more like fantasy as opposed to like this needs to happen.
It wasn't like so much a storyline, but I just thought
exactly.
that the two skill sets, looking back at that era, two of the clearly best guys, I thought it would have been great to see what would have happened.
What do you think, Chuck?
Well, I mean, there's been so many, but honestly, when I look back at Dan Henderson and Chuck Liddell, the fact that they never actually crossed paths.
No one picked the low-hanging fruit?
Who was the low-hanging fruit?
GSP Silva.
Yeah, I stayed.
Really?
Yeah.
Purposely stayed.
That one's
Sorry,
that's
I
dead
didn't mean
fruit.
to-
That's dead fruit on the floor. Actually, no, I'm just kidding. No,
But it could happen.
Yeah,
Go
that
ahead.
still could happen.
There's
Although
one
it
more,
has
too.
lost all of its it's lost a lot of its luster. That fight to me, there was a couple years back there where I really wanted to see it, and it just never happened because of the partition between Pride and the UFC, and then once Henderson was over, it just never materialized, and then Chuck rode off into the sunset. But that's a fight that I always wanted to see when both guys were sort of at the top of the game.
There's another one too, Fedor versus Randy.
Yeah, that was the
I thought that
low-hanging
one,
fruit.
yeah.
That was the
Fedor
lowest of the
versus
low.
We mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Off air, yeah.
I thought we were reaching deep in our
Yeah.
I know,
pockets.
everyone tried to be all esoteric and nerdy.
Fedor versus Josh Barnett.
Fedor versus Josh Barnett. Yeah, that wasn't well.
Affliction never
Yeah,
happened.
that one was just the way that died. Everyone was kind of like, oh.
You could do Fedor versus like 5 different guys.
Yeah,
Fedor,
but the
Brock
Randy
Lesnar.
thing. Remember, when Randy tried to
Randy
get out of his
Boston.
contract.
Affliction. They had the poster. They had
Yeah,
the commercial.
to me
and
that
everything.
one. When
I thought one of you guys was going to say
that could have been huge too, for sure. But you're right. Like it's amazing. Fedor versus Alistair Overeem with that at that moment in time when they made that Grand Prix, people were like salivating over that prospect. So it's actually sort of a credit to Fedor that where we're thinking like some of the. It's sad that it's the fights that didn't get made, but it's a testament to how much he intrigued us as one of the greatest fighters ever.
Kimbo versus Ken Shamrock. How close we came. How close.
Well, I know you said Dana has talked about it at length, but like Fedor, realistically, based on Brock, looking how bad he was again, he could have been the first guy to knock out Brock,
That would
and
be
then
massive.
his status would have just higher than
All
ever.
time, right there.
Now you talk about the biggest tease of them all. There's no bigger tease, and this is the one I wanted to see.
Here we go. This ought to be good.
Tito Ortiz, Dana White.
Oh,
Come on.
Yes.
That's
They
the
should have
one.
done. Remember the grudge match TV show with the
Sure.
gigantic gloves? That's what they should have did it with.
Well, not that. I remember the
still
one
time,
the
just
like TV
special.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, what was it called? Bad Blood or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Oh, it was tremendous. I actually
Tremendous,
recently rewatched it. It's a fascinating watch. It really is. A younger Dana White, Tito doing his thing, shows up to the weigh-ins, gets undressed. There's Keith Kaiser there and everything, and he's just sitting around. It's high drama.
Tito and
Yeah.
Ken too are supposed to go on off the record, right, and talk a bunch of smack about
Yeah.
Dana this week. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, but that's the. I mean, maybe those. Well, no, I won't even want to see that. But Anthony Tito Ortiz is basically toxic at this point. But
And no one brings up. Oh, go ahead.
well, no, I was just gonna say there was a moment in time where I wouldn't have like hated seeing that, but I always found at that time that to be a pointless distraction.
Will we
Of course,
at
I'm
some
100%
point?
joking, by the way.
Will we at some point wonder about Rousey and Cyborg? So there's a few
Oh,
matches
that's
out
another
there.
good one. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's true.
Jones and Silva,
Right.
What is there any heat between Gina and
Rousey?
Ron? Yeah,
Not really.
no.
But that would be fun. Another
We
one.
got Aldo Pettis too. I know it's recent,
Yeah.
but we may not ever see that.
We could sit here all day doing this. How about Ken versus Frank?
Yeah.
I don't care.
I'm glad that.
No, but back in the day.
Oh, like when it mattered, when
Yeah,
there was a moment
yeah,
to
yeah.
make it. Yeah, sure, of course.
Back in the day. And here's the
I
super
think
fight
Frank would have
that
crushed Ken.
probably. But here's the super fight that no one talks about. That is the super of all super fights. In my opinion, the most interesting one: Kane versus John Jones. That's the best of the super fights.
I think it is.
is now.
But John has some reparative work to do because I thought that was. I mentioned on the show. I thought they were on a collision course, and after Kane doing what he did to Junior,
Yeah.
and Gustafsson doing what he did to Jones, you're like, well, I wouldn't rule it out. Certainly not. He's going to get Jones is going to get much bigger. If you've ever seen him in person, he's actually got a bigger frame than Kane. But he's got some work to do.
All right, guys, great stuff. A lot to digest here. Now we want to hear from you. Which fight in the history of mixed martial arts you really wanted to see was never made? There are a lot out there that we didn't touch on, so let us know in the comment section below. And how about this development? Luke Thomas has become the darling of the comment section. Have you noticed that?
I don't make great first impressions, but I make lasting ones.
Gosh, now they're sticking up for you. Now the White Knights are fighting for your honor. Great stuff out of the panel today, and good job on your first appearance. Awesome.
Honor to be on.
The D stands for diva. I'll remember that. That was great stuff. For Luke, Michael, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat.